She doesn't fight loudly. She doesn't beg for approval. Yet somehow, her existence alone creates enemies she never asked for and never fears. She doesn't announce herself. She doesn't need to. A Sigma female enters life quietly, but her presence shifts the atmosphere. People feel it before they understand it. Something about her calm, her restraint, her refusal to perform for approval, it unsettles those who rely on noise, hierarchy, or control. Her journey is not dramatic on the surface. Internally, it is relentless, and along that journey, she meets enemies not because she seeks power, but because she refuses to surrender it. These enemies are not random. They appear at specific moments, for specific reasons. Each one reveals a truth about the Sigma female and the world she moves through. The first enemy appears early. Enemy 1. The insecure controller. This enemy thrives on authority, not competence. They need obedience more than results. Structure comforts them because it places them above someone else. And the Sigma female disrupts that structure without lifting a finger. She doesn't rebel loudly. She doesn't challenge openly. She simply does her work well, thinks independently, and refuses to be micromanaged. That alone is enough. The insecure controller senses danger in her self-sufficiency. They realize quickly that she doesn't need their approval to function. Their rules don't impress her. Their titles don't intimidate her, and worst of all, they cannot read her. So they tighten their grip. They give unnecessary instructions. They question her methods even when the results speak for themselves. They create invisible tests designed to provoke compliance, not because she's wrong, but because they need proof that they still have control. The Sigma female recognizes this pattern instinctively. She doesn't argue. She doesn't explain excessively. She documents, observes, and adapts quietly. She understands that power struggles feed this enemy, so she starves them of reaction. What the insecure controller never realizes is this: their behavior only sharpens her discernment. She learns how authority reveals character. She learns how fragile ego hides behind rigid rules. And she learns that true power never needs to announce itself. This enemy teaches her restraint. The second enemy appears not as opposition but as concern. Enemy 2, the disguised doubter. This one smiles. This one claims to care. This one says things like, "I'm just worried about you," or "Are you sure that's realistic?" The disguised doubter doesn't openly oppose the Sigma female's goals. They subtly shrink them. They question her decisions under the mask of practicality. They remind her of risks when she's already calculated them. They bring up failure scenarios she's already prepared for. Not to protect her, but to keep her within a range they understand. This enemy is uncomfortable with ambition that doesn't seek permission, especially when it comes from a woman who doesn't explain herself emotionally. The disguised doubter often comes from close proximity: friends, relatives, colleagues who have chosen safety over growth. They feel exposed by the Sigma female's courage. Her movement forward forces them to confront their own stagnation, so they plant seeds. Don't rush. Maybe later. You're changing. The Sigma female hears the undertone immediately. This is not advice. This is fear looking for validation. She doesn't cut them off instantly. She watches. She listens. She notes how their support fades the closer she gets to success. She notices how encouragement turns into silence when her independence becomes undeniable, and then she adjusts her access. She learns that not everyone deserves front row seats to her evolution. Some people only deserve updates after the fact. This enemy teaches her selective disclosure. The third enemy doesn't doubt her. They envy her. Enemy 3, the silent competitor. This enemy never admits competition but lives inside it. They observe the Sigma female constantly. They mirror her choices. They measure themselves against her progress. And yet they resent her for existing outside the race entirely. The Sigma female doesn't compete for validation. She doesn't compare timelines. She moves according to her internal compass that makes her unpredictable and unbearable to someone who defines worth by comparison. The silent competitor studies her lifestyle, her habits, her discipline. They imitate what they can, but never understand the source. They copy the surface, not the mindset. And when imitation fails to produce the same confidence, resentment grows. This enemy spreads subtle narratives. They downplay her achievements. They frame her solitude as arrogance. They label her boundaries as coldness, not openly. Strategically, the Sigma female senses it in energy before words. She notices the shift in tone, the passive remarks, the sudden distance mixed with attention. She doesn't confront. She doesn't explain. She simply stops sharing. The more she withdraws, the louder the competitor's insecurity becomes, and that silence becomes her shield. This enemy teaches her energetic boundaries. The fourth enemy feels more personal. Enemy 4. The emotional manipulator. This enemy wants access, not connection. They are drawn to the Sigma female's depth, her emotional regulation, her presence. But instead of meeting her with honesty, they attempt to control her through guilt, pressure, or emotional unpredictability. They test her boundaries repeatedly. They mistake her calm for tolerance. They assume her empathy means availability. The emotional manipulator becomes frustrated when tactics fail, when drama doesn't provoke reaction, when withdrawal doesn't cause panic, when affection isn't weaponized successfully. So they escalate. They accuse her of being distant. They frame her boundaries as cruelty. They claim she's too guarded, without acknowledging how consistently she's respected herself. The Sigma female doesn't internalize this. She understands emotional discipline is threatening to those who rely on chaos to feel significant. She doesn't argue about feelings. She doesn't justify her limits. She simply enforces them, and when necessary, she walks away without theatrics. This enemy teaches her emotional sovereignty. The fifth enemy appears when she begins to rise. Enemy 5. The tradition enforcer. This enemy hides behind norms, culture, and the way things are done. They are deeply uncomfortable with deviation, especially when it's graceful, successful, and unapologetic. The Sigma female challenges tradition not by rejecting it loudly, but by outgrowing it quietly. She doesn't fit predefined roles. She doesn't measure worth by approval. She doesn't sacrifice autonomy for acceptance. That unsettles the tradition enforcer. They question her choices using moral language. They pressure her using collective expectations. They imply that her independence is selfish, unnatural, or unsustainable. But what they truly fear is this: if she can live freely without punishment, the rules they obeyed without question lose their authority. The Sigma female understands this instinctively. She doesn't try to convince them. She doesn't seek to dismantle tradition. She simply refuses to be confined by it. Her life becomes evidence, and evidence is more threatening than argument. This enemy teaches her quiet defiance. The sixth enemy is subtle but persistent. Enemy 6. The energy leech. This enemy is not malicious. They are draining. They gravitate toward the Sigma female because of her composure, insight, and grounded nature. They seek advice without implementing it. They seek comfort without accountability. They seek proximity without contribution. At first, the Sigma female gives generously. She listens. She supports. She offers clarity. But over time, she notices the imbalance. Conversations revolve around the leech's problems. Growth never follows guidance. Crisis replaces progress, and her presence becomes a resource rather than a relationship. The energy leech resents boundaries. They interpret distance as abandonment. They guilt her for protecting her time. The Sigma female doesn't explain energy economics to someone committed to depletion. She simply reduces access. She learns that availability is not compassion, and that protecting her energy is not selfish, it's necessary. This enemy teaches her conservation. The seventh enemy is the most dangerous, but also the most revealing. Enemy 7. The projection mirror. This enemy doesn't hate her. They hate what she reflects. The Sigma female's discipline exposes laziness. Her self-respect exposes self-betrayal. Her silence exposes insecurity. So they project. They call her intimidating when they feel small. They call her cold when they feel exposed. They call her arrogant when they feel inadequate. This enemy assigns motives she never had. They narrate her life through their wounds. The Sigma female doesn't correct projections. She understands that clarity only threatens those committed to misunderstanding. She lets people believe what they need to survive their own reflection, and in doing so, she becomes untouchable. This enemy teaches her detachment. Every enemy on her journey serves a purpose, not to stop her but to refine her. By the time she recognizes these patterns, she no longer feels surprised by resistance. She expects it. She moves accordingly. She understands now. Enemies are not obstacles. They are confirmations, and her journey continues not louder, not softer but sharper. As time passes, the Sigma female stops labeling these encounters as personal. She sees the pattern clearly now. Resistance appears wherever autonomy exists. Pushback follows clarity, and discomfort arises when someone refuses to play a role that benefits others more than herself. She no longer reacts emotionally to opposition. Reaction would imply permission. Instead, she refines her movement. Her walk becomes slower but more deliberate. Her words become fewer but more precise. She understands that survival is not about constant defense, it's about strategic absence. She learns when to be seen and when to disappear. One of the most misunderstood shifts in the Sigma female's journey is her relationship with solitude. Outsiders assume it's avoidance. They mistake silence for damage. But solitude is not where she hides, it's where she calibrates. Away from noise, she rebuilds clarity. She reflects on how every enemy revealed something essential, not about them but about her evolution. The insecure controller showed her that obedience is often demanded by those afraid of independence. The disguised doubter revealed that fear often wears the face of concern. The silent competitor proved that envy doesn't always look aggressive. The emotional manipulator taught her the difference between connection and control. The tradition enforcer exposed how norms collapse when confronted by evidence. The energy leech clarified that compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure. And the projection mirror confirmed that people attack what forces them to confront themselves. She integrates these lessons quietly. Her discernment sharpens to the point where she no longer needs repeated proof. She notices shifts immediately, tone changes, behavioral inconsistencies, emotional hooks disguised as kindness. She doesn't jump to conclusions. She simply adjusts proximity. Distance becomes her most powerful response. The Sigma female stops over-explaining her decisions. She understands that clarity does not require consensus. The need to be understood fades as self-trust solidifies. She also learns something else, something rarely discussed. Enemies don't disappear when you grow, they change form. As her confidence stabilizes, she attracts a new type of resistance. Not overt hostility, not sabotage, but subtle dismissal. People begin to underestimate her intentionally. They assume her silence means passivity. They confuse her calm with indifference. They believe her lack of self-promotion indicates lack of ambition. And she lets them. Underestimation becomes camouflage. While others waste energy defending reputations, she builds skills. While others seek validation, she accumulates leverage. While others announce plans, she executes privately. She no longer corrects false assumptions. Correcting would require engagement. Engagement would require access, and access is earned. The Sigma female's emotional landscape becomes cleaner with time, not emptier, cleaner. She feels deeply but selectively. She trusts slowly but fully. She invests energy where reciprocity exists, not where potential is promised. This emotional economy protects her from burnout. It allows her to move through environments without absorbing chaos. She no longer absorbs other people's urgency. Urgency, she's learned, is often manufactured by those who lack direction. She moves at her own pace, and that pace unsettles people who equate speed with importance. There are moments when the weight of awareness feels heavy, when seeing patterns makes innocence impossible, when detachment feels lonely. But the Sigma female does not romanticize ignorance. She chooses clarity, even when it costs connection. She also recognizes that not everyone who resists her is an enemy. Some are simply unprepared for her frequency. Not everyone can meet calm without needing to disturb it. Not everyone can sit with silence without filling it. Not everyone can respect boundaries without trying to test them. She stops expecting people to rise to her level. Expectations are a form of attachment, and attachment, when unmet, leads to resentment. Instead, she meets people where they are and decides whether they belong where she's going. This discernment changes her relationships profoundly. Romantic interest no longer distracts her from self-mastery. She observes before engaging. She listens for consistency, not intensity. She notices how someone responds to no, not how they behave during yes. Anyone who challenges her boundaries out of curiosity is dismissed. Anyone who respects them without explanation earns attention. She understands that intimacy is not built through emotional exposure alone but through mutual regulation. The Sigma female does not bond through chaos. She bonds through alignment. In professional spaces, she stops proving competence to those committed to misunderstanding it. She lets outcomes speak. She builds reputations without marketing herself emotionally. She learns that visibility without strategy attracts predators, so she chooses precision over popularity. Her presence becomes selective. This selectivity is often misinterpreted as arrogance. She accepts that misunderstanding is part of sovereignty. Explaining herself would require shrinking her clarity to fit someone else's comfort. She refuses The Sigma female also makes peace with something difficult. Growth creates separation. Not everyone who started with her can continue with her, and that does not make her disloyal. It makes her honest. She doesn't abandon people impulsively. She simply stops carrying connections that require self-betrayal. The guilt fades with practice. She realizes guilt was never hers to begin with. It was assigned by those who benefited from her availability. As her inner world stabilizes, her external reactions diminish. She becomes less reactive, less defensive, less eager to clarify. This emotional neutrality confuses manipulators. Without reaction, their tactics collapse. Drama requires participation. She withdraws consent. She also stops absorbing labels: intimidating, cold, too much, too quiet, too distant. Labels are shortcuts for people who don't want to do the work of understanding complexity. She lets labels exist without attaching identity to them. Identity, for her, is internal. The Sigma female begins to operate from principle rather than emotion, not because she lacks feeling, but because she has mastered it. She knows the difference between intuition and impulse, between fear and discernment, between loneliness and solitude. That distinction keeps her from chasing connections that feel familiar but cost peace. Her peace becomes non-negotiable. She protects it without apology. What others interpret as withdrawal is actually refinement. She is no longer available for dynamics that require self-abandonment. And because she no longer feeds resistance with reaction, something interesting happens. Enemies lose interest. Without access to her energy, they redirect attention elsewhere. Without emotional return, projection dissolves. Without conflict, control becomes pointless. The Sigma female doesn't defeat enemies, she outgrows them. Her life becomes quieter, but fuller. Smaller circle, stronger alignment. Less noise, more direction. She doesn't seek validation for this lifestyle. She knows that those who understand don't need explanation, and those who demand explanation were never aligned. She stops performing resilience. She simply lives it. And perhaps the most powerful shift of all, she stops seeing herself as separate from the journey. There is no destination where resistance ends, no point where understanding becomes universal. There is only refinement. She moves forward knowing that every encounter, pleasant or hostile, is information. She extracts lessons without attachment. She integrates without bitterness. Her strength is not in confrontation, it is in continuity. She continues despite misunderstanding, despite projection, despite resistance, not because she's hardened but because she's anchored, and that anchoring makes her impossible to derail. The Sigma female doesn't need to be understood, she needs to remain sovereign, and she does.